Hello and welcome to Today in Film episode 31. I'm your host Dominic Parry, and today is
Kevin Parry.
And today's episode we're going to be talking about the personal history of David Copperfield, a 2019/2020 film that was hit by the COVID pandemic. So, what do you think about this film?
I thought it was excellent. I watched it first about 3 weeks ago and watched it again yesterday. Certainly, the sort of film that you can watch on two occasions like that in fairly sort of quick succession. Plenty going on in it. I think it's really well shot. I think the casting is excellent. There are some standout performances by Peter Capaldi, Hugh Laurie, and Dev Patel. It's colourful, it's exciting, it's comical, it's pretty much got it all. I think
Yeah,
it's a really good film.
I think this ranks in one of my probably one of my top 10 because of how just enjoyable it is to watch. Like, there's stuff that happens and you know it's happening, you know it's going to happen. It's not hidden. There's no mystery to it really.
No.
So you can't. This isn't a film where you watch it and the mystery is a part of it. It's like the film. You know what happens, and it's the acting, it's the kind of storytelling that really keeps you coming back.
Yeah, and when you watch it for a second time or a third time, there are bits that you pick up that perhaps you didn't see the first time around. So there's a lot of humour in it. It's very well scripted. There's lots of little sort of laugh aloud jokes really that come through, and the characters are well depicted. I think they're very well chosen. Um, the the young lad who plays the young version of Copperfield is very confident on screen. A very good choice, I think.
Yeah, I think the casting is one of the best things about this film because it takes some real kind of big British actors. You've got Tilda Swinton, Benedict Wong. These kind of people who are now really up there,
Yeah.
and it puts them in there with some TV stars and stuff.
Yeah.
Like it's not kind of barriered, and it's not like a Hollywood production where it's all Hollywood stars.
Yeah. And I don't think there's a bad performance in the whole film.
No,
I can't think of anyone who sort of falls below the standard really. They complement each other very well. The humour comes across. It's sort of snappy and quick, and there are no scenes in it really where you think, well, that was pointless. Why didn't they cut that? It just sort of flows really well, and it's great. Great
I
cinema,
think
great
yeah,
entertainment.
one of the reasons it flows so well is the kind of cuts it uses. So instead of just passing to another scene, they'll have some artistic kind of way to get to the next scene.
Yeah.
So there's a few where it's like a cloth flapping and stuff like that, which it just makes it a lot easier to watch.
Yeah.
So you're not in a lot of other films, you're jumping about and the kind of cuts are quite heavy. Whereas this, it literally does just flow and it just eases you into the next scenes.
Yeah. There are some of the I suppose some of the bits of the story where it's sort of cringy, really, how the twist of fate affects the characters, and particularly Copperfield. But it's done in a sensitive way, and there's humour, and it's a very sort of human sort of film, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think um, it's just a film that you can watch to enjoy it,
Yeah.
and I think there's one tiny thing that like I picked up on. Peter Capaldi, who's obviously a Scottish actor, is playing a Londoner.
Yeah.
And the accent he has kind of drops from it kind of it goes thick, and then the next second he'll completely go Scottish, but it doesn't actually affect the film at all.
It normally, I noticed that, but the scene actually overtakes it, doesn't it? So
Yeah.
it's a comical sort of scene, and that just adds to the comedy. Really.
But the thing is, I think because of who he is, the character, kind of he is a scrounger. The whole idea of him having this fake accent,
Yeah,
could be part of the character.
well, his character, Mr. Micawber, is a bit of a chameleon, isn't he? So he changes to suit the sort of circumstance, really. and I thought it was hilarious when he turned up as one of the tutors at the school, and had no background in teaching or anything like that, and tried to wing it, and really good. And the school, of course, falling down, bits of the masonry coming in, and buckets of water around the place. And then, of course, they were introduced then to Uriah Heep, who was a really menacing and
Yeah,
skin crawling sort of character. Um, and that took us in a new direction then, really, didn't it? Exploring his character.
I think one of the things this film does so well is that Uriah Heep isn't an imposing force. So he turns up and he's kind of just there, and he does come across like a character who's just going to be there as like a comical kind of weirdo. But
Yeah,
then obviously he just keeps popping back up as it goes forward,
yeah,
and it's this kind of evolution of you've got David Copperfield going one way, and then Uriah Heep's going the complete opposite way,
yeah,
and it's in tandem. And it's kind of it's a really interesting dynamic.
yeah. And the other interesting one is every time Micawber turns up, he's so upbeat and so sort of he's got an excuse for everything, hasn't he?
Mm.
And there are some really comical scenes where the bailiffs are trying to take away things to settle his debts, and they nick the clock through the window, and the baby is being dragged down the corridors. They're trying to take the mat out, and then in one of the later scenes where Copperfield comes across Micawber, and he's sleeping in a doorway,
Yeah.
and his response then is, "Yes, we do reside primarily al fresco." The wife and the kiddies are across in the other doorway, across the other side of the street. It's just brilliant. It's
Well,
brilliant.
I think one of the the cast is kind of one of the biggest takeaways from this,
Yeah,
and I think one of the best pairings is Hugh Laurie and Peter Capaldi, because they just kind of bounce off each other. They're not on screen together long, but those scenes where they are together,
yeah.
it just works comically, and there's no kind of weird edges to it. It is just very kind of Laurel and Hardy
It is,
almost.
yeah, and I think Copperfield's character is very sensitive to Hugh Laurie's Mr. Dick character, isn't he? Sort
Mm.
of, he understands and really, yeah, he doesn't question, does he? He just sort of gets on and tries to help him. And some of the scenes where they're flying a kite and all of that, it's real pure comedy, really. It's great.
But it is escapism in it. It's
Yeah,
kind of defining what this film is in those scenes. So they don't really they don't. There's quite a few of them that he uses as kind of gaps.
yeah,
So something will happen, and then the scene of flying kites, and it doesn't actually damage the flow, because you know that it's happening. You know that it was happening already, so you kind of expected it to come back.
yeah. Apparently, when I was looking, did a little bit of research, and the overall cost of the film was $15.6 million, and at box office it managed to claw back about 14.2 million. So there's obviously a deficit
Yeah,
there, um, purely and simply because of when it was released and COVID. So it was released in Britain in January, and they just managed to get some screenings, and it came out, and so they took some money at box office.
yeah.
But
It was one of the ones where this film released, and so I think Birds of Prey, a big DC superhero film, released around a similar time,
okay,
and that did a lot better because it released in America as well.
yeah,
Whereas this was only UK and I think Europe. So the box office is going to get from that is nothing compared to like America and China.
yeah.
It's just
I would
it's a
imagine
shame.
they've clawed a bit back though when because it's now been released on
Amazon.
Amazon. Yeah,
Yeah.
so they would have got something from that. So they very likely broke even or made a very small profit, I would have thought. Under normal circumstances, I think the film would have really taken off.
Well, I
And
think I think it will be one that becomes a kind of not really a cult film, but a kind of missed opportunity film. Like
Yeah,
people find it and go, what happened to this, and why didn't I know about this before?
yeah,
Because obviously it has some amazing stars in it. It has some great directing. It has a great story.
yeah,
So it really is a film that should be known and watched by a lot more people.
yeah,
Which I think it is just a shame that it didn't. Um, I think one of the things that I like about this film is that the story, because obviously it's based on Charles Dickens,
yeah,
which Charles Dickens, you kind of take that as well. It's kind of 1800s. It's going to be something that feels old, but it feels fresh and kind of almost universal.
yeah.
And I don't know whether it's to do with how the script was written, but it just feels like something that everyone can kind of get something from.
Yeah, and the cinematography in it as well, and the colours and scenes changing fairly quickly just keeps it
Yeah,
fresh, doesn't it, all the way through? And that humour, so the humour flows. It's not sort of so there are times where their sort of their plight and their poverty is a real downer, but it's dealt with in a sort of light-hearted way, isn't it? It doesn't sort of dwell on it really. And even Uriah Heep, when he's at the sort of worst of his powers, you know that he's going to be assuaged, and
yeah,
they're going to sort of overtake him and get him back. But the characters, I think, are explored brilliantly. And
yeah,
for me, I think the standout performances are Peter Capaldi and Hugh Laurie. I think those two are absolutely superb on screen and yeah, really good in this
yeah.
film.
Well, I think because this is by Armando Iannucci, so the guy who did the Thick of It.
Yeah,
So that's obviously political drama starring Peter Capaldi,
yeah,
and the character, the characters that Peter Capaldi plays are obviously very different. But this film, compared to the Thick of It, and also to the Death of Stalin, which is also another one of his films, they're just so different, kind of in every way.
yeah.
Like because we watched the Death of Stalin the other day, and it's compared to this, it's a good film, but this film just has more there for you to kind of bite and
Yeah,
chew. Like
yeah.
it's just, I think it will hook more people than the Death of Stalin would.
Death of Stalin was comical in many of its scenes, wasn't it?
It
But of
was,
course,
but
the subject matter was a little bit more onerous.
yeah,
But I don't know. I personally wouldn't go back and watch it again. As soon after seeing the first time, I might go back and watch it in a year's time or whatever. But wasn't as easy to watch. It wasn't. It didn't flow along as well, and there were lots of questions really that came
yeah.
up from it.
Well, this film is kind of, it's an evolution of his directing, I think, because I don't know if you've seen the thick of it, but that's shot very kind of documentary style, like
Yeah,
well, not documentary, mockumentary style. So, not professionally uh, kind of cut and all that stuff. And then you've got Death of Stalin, which is quite similar. And then you've got this, and it's a whole other level. So it's
and the Death of Stalin film was based on a graphic novel, wasn't it?
uh, yeah, I think it was, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So obviously, I think he's probably moving into kind of adaptations. And honestly, if he can keep up work like this, then I really do hope he keeps up doing it.
yeah. There were some good uh, performances. I thought Paddy Considine. Um, I thought that character came along really well, powerfully.
In the Death of Stalin, yeah.
Yeah, and actually some of the scenes were dealt with in a sort of light-hearted sort of way because it was quite a grave subject matter, wasn't it? Really, and
Well, I think compared to, comparing the two films, this is obviously a lot more light-hearted, even though it does deal with kind of poverty and stuff. It's not in a dark light.
No.
So it's there's jokes in there. There's kind of this comedy that flows throughout the entire film.
Well, there are farcical scenes, aren't there? Like, Stalin has collapsed and is lying on the floor. Um, and they're trying to decide. So the committee, so they're all sort of arriving at different times, and there's sort of this jip
Mm.
between them about who got there first, and there's obviously a scrabble for power, and then somebody just suggests they should call a doctor, and the committee are standing around Stalin, who's sort of suffering on the floor in a pool of his own wee. They can't decide on who they should call. Most of the doctors have been killed or
Yeah,
been taken in and are in the gulag. And yeah, so there are comical bits which come through. So there's one scene as well where they're running through the woods, and the character says, "How can you run and plot at the same time?" And of course the doctors, when they arrive to deal with Stalin, they don't actually want to commit to a diagnosis.
yeah,
They're scared that if they should say the wrong thing, or if they should make a sort of criticism, or if the diagnosis is not what the committee want to hear, that they'll be dragged off, basically. Um, Rupert Friend, I think, is brilliant in it as well. So he's the sort of drunken son of Stalin, and he sort of bursts into the room, and every scene he's in is just full of sort of vibrancy and life.
yeah.
Describes one of the men as a testicle at one point, which is hugely funny, and other comedy sort of comments come out. Farcical scenes as well. So when they're leaving, they all jump into their cars and they're sort of in a rush to get away, and then they all sort of jam up, and they're sort of stuck in a traffic jam. So there's all this sort of honking of horns and moving of cars, and I thought that was quite funny.
I think one of the things to note from both of them is that uh, the people who wrote this, Armando Iannucci being one of them, because he co-writes both of them. He's good at comedy, and it's not just one kind of comedy. So it'll have some that's kind of visual gags, some that are kind of puns, wordplay, some that are very overt,
Yeah,
straight up kind of like the testicle joke. But it's done in a way that doesn't kind of pull you out of the film.
yeah. The scene as well. Saying that, one scene sort of comes to mind where so there's a Mozart concert, and Paddy Considine is flapping about. He's had a call from Stalin, and he's got 17 minutes in which to call back. And when he does call back, Stalin asks if the performance has been recorded that evening, and then they realise to their horror that it hasn't. So the whole performance is over. Everybody's sort of leaving, and he has to round everybody back up, and then to make up the audience, because some have already left, he has to go out and sort of drag people in off the street, and it's just pure comedy really, because they get the audience back together. They manage to get all the players back on stage, and then there's a scene where there's an old lady knitting in the audience. So these are people who've never been to a
Yeah,
concert before in their lives. They don't know who Mozart is probably, and then it sort of swings to another one who's got a big, huge sort of jar of pickled onions, and she's eating pickled onions in the audience. Anyway, they carry on and they manage to get the recording done, and then we move on. But I thought that was really good.
yeah. Well, I think one of the things I mentioned to you before was the kind of there's this in Dave Copperfield. There's colorblind casting, so whereas these characters might have been white in the original, the actors that play them don't have to be white
Yeah,
necessarily. It's kind
yeah,
of
yeah,
whoever fits the role the best. So obviously you've got Mrs. Steelforth, I think it is, and you've got Dev Patel as David Copperfield. You've got Benedict Wong. So
yeah, yeah,
it's a very diverse cast in this. And then going to the death of Stalin, the cast isn't as diverse. But there's an interesting thing that I picked up on, that instead of having these characters, these actors speak in a kind of Russian accent, they just speak their own accent.
Yeah.
So obviously you've got like Jason Isaacs comes in as General Vasily, I think it is,
Yeah.
and then he's just thick British accent,
Yeah.
which obviously just doesn't fit
And
at all with
there's
this
a
whole
strong
thing.
American accent as well in there, isn't there?
Well, there's
Yeah.
Steve Buscemi's there,
Yeah.
and I can't remember the guy's name, but the one who plays the guy who becomes Stalin's replacement essentially. He's very he's very kind of timidly American,
Yeah.
which playing the guy who becomes the leader of Russia, it feels off, doesn't it? But it
It does.
works.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Um,
Not quite as easy a film to watch.
no,
I didn't think, and be perfectly honest, there was humour in it, but I guess not the sort of film that you'd want to watch again. In quick succession, really.
well I think um, that is in part to do with the fact that it is kind of based partly on true events. So it's a whole thing of this is something that really did happen, some of it. So it's a bit heavier to watch.
Yeah.
Whereas David Copperfield is it's a very fictional story with some real elements in there.
And it's far more entertaining. I think
Yeah,
it comes across well. It looks good on screen, doesn't it? And we watched it on a large screen at home. It would have been another level, I think, if it had been in the cinema.
yeah. Well,
The background scenes in David Copperfield. There was the scene down at Yarmouth where they're gutting fish, and then there's some nice aerial shots in it as well. Um, some very very nice sort of shots where they're panning through the countryside, and then the insides of all those sort of buildings where they're living in impoverished sort of circumstances. They're just glorious to watch, really.
yeah. Well, it's an impressive film
Yeah,
for how it's done. Like you said, there's no scene in there that feels kind of redundant. Everything feels like it belongs.
yeah.
And honestly, there's nothing in this film I can say I don't like.
Is there a standout sort of character for you?
Not particularly, because I think they all add to the film. They all do something unique that kind of adds in a different layer to it. I think the only character that kind of I'm not really fussed about is Mrs. Steelforth, because
Yeah,
obviously she doesn't really do much, and so that she's not unimportant, but it's obviously that she doesn't really leave a lasting impression.
yeah. She's a bit of a dark character, really, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's Steelforth's mother.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Have you got anything else you want to say about this film?
Well, yeah. So visually, I thought it was exciting. So and there are cues and there are sort of humorous bits in the sort of scenes around as well. If you watch it, second watching, you notice things that perhaps
Yeah.
you might have missed the first time. So there's one scene where they're in the garden and they're panning through, and you see topiary, all the sort of the hedgerows and the bushes have been cut into certain shapes, and there's one which is a rat, which
Mm.
is quite funny, and and just moving on really, and so the first scenes are of Copperfield's birth in the rookery, and then later when they're taking him off to Yarmouth, Yarm as they call it, his first sort of introduction to that. They're going along, and you remember the scene where he looks up in the sky and he says, "Oh, look, there's plenty of sky here. Too
Yeah.
much sky, even too much for a bird." Which it's funny. And again, the young David Copperfield, I thought really really performed well in it,
Yeah.
and suited perfectly.
I
So
think the casting of David Copperfield is well, the casting overall is perfect in this film. And I think colorblind casting does definitely add to that.
Yeah,
But one of the interesting things is that I can't remember what her name is. Morfydd Clark plays both his mother and his kind of love interest
yeah,
later on, which it's because of how she's kind of made up in makeup and hairstyling. In a first watch, you might not notice this the same person,
yeah,
which is it's an impressive thing to be able to hide the same actor.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I thought Iron Barnard's performance was good as well as Steelforth. I thought he was a slightly sort of moody and there were some scenes where he was mysterious and there was sort of obviously something going on behind. You thought he was plotting about something and then that was revealed later on, wasn't it? Where he sort of went
Yeah,
off the rails a little bit. Um, yeah, he was an uneasy character, but very well played. I thought
well,
an Iron Barnard impressed me.
I think with his character, it's quite a good depiction of kind of like depression and stuff. Because obviously there's the line of everyone loves James Steelforth, but himself, and it's
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
it's a whole new take on it that obviously it doesn't give it in this horrible, depressing light. Instead, it's quite moving and it just
yeah,
flows.
yeah. But he's obviously a troubled character, isn't
Yeah,
he? Yeah. And the other one I thought was Uriah Heep, played by Ben Whishaw, was a really powerful and sort of um, creepy character, wasn't he? There were scenes where he was sort of invading people's personal space, and he's sort of he's a crawling sort of
yeah.
creepy sort of character. And that then obviously develops as the story unfolds, and you see what he's truly capable of.
I think one of the funny scenes that I don't know if it's meant to be funny or if it's meant to be, or if it's an error is when he goes to uh, Uriah Heep and his mother's house for tea. The mother goes, like, I'll go and get some more tea, and then when she comes back in, she just comes in with more heavy cake.
Right?
So it's I'm not sure if that's meant to be kind of part of the same scene, but
Did she have tea?
no, she didn't.
Oh, right.
She comes back with just the cake. So
Okay.
so I don't know whether they had another scene or maybe she said something else in a different take, but
Oh, I see.
it's a weird one.
And Daisy May Cooper as Peggotty. I thought that was a really quirky and good fun. That character
Well, I think
played well.
all of the cast from Yarmouth, that kind of that group, you could say, they're quite uh, they're quite good in their like I don't know how to say it like they're quite regional, aren't they? In
Yeah,
comparison to
yeah,
all the other people. So like Peter Capaldi is a Londoner, but then is he actually a Londoner? You've got what is it? I can't remember what it is. Murdstone, I think it is. You've
oh
got
yeah, yeah, yeah,
the brother and sister, and they're quite strong in their wording.
yeah,
So it's definitely a takeaway from all these kind of posh people, essentially.
yeah. And Rosalind Eliza as well. That character played by Agnes Wick.
Yeah.
Sorry, Agnes. What am I saying? Um, I thought that was a very very well played character too, and of course they not to spoil the sort of ending of it, but it all comes together for them, doesn't it? Really, at the end.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Have you
good.
got anything else you want to say about this film?
Well, I was just thinking, what would you give it out of 10?
Um, I think I'd give it a 10.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I don't think there are really any main areas where it could be improved. Certainly a good watch, and you can certainly go back to it time and again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh, so yeah, that'll be it for this week. See you next week.
thank you.